And we can start with item number 3, SB 129. Presentation on bills as well as testimony, but then we will hold off the votes until next week when we have a full committee. Mr. Lennon, since Mr. Heath is here, would you mind letting him go? Appreciate it. Mr. Heath, we begin with item number 2, SB number 111.
Madam Chair and Senators, this is a pretty straightforward issue on the public's right to know. You know, as you can imagine, you know, given the uncertainties of the budget, it does put at risk the Brown Act, the public's right to know. So what this bill
Sorry,
will
Mr. Yee, I had actually called for SB 111.
Okay, you want to do one? I'll do that first.
But we can switch gears.
No. Why don't we just go ahead
All right,
and do
let's
that,
go with
okay?
SB number 111, item number 2 on the agenda.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Chair and Senators. This bill is an issue that really came about in 2008. In the Ladies Professional Golf Association, they announced a policy that basically said that any individual that played in their particular tournament, championship tournament, that they had to speak English. And as you can imagine, the correlation between speaking English and playing golf well is absolutely zero. And unfortunately, the Ladies Professional Golf Association continue to press forward with that particular issue. And so we roll up our sleeves, got the LPGA to rescind that particular policy. So to codify that particular action, what we basically am doing in this particular bill is to say that use of language, unless there is some business necessity, ought not to be the rule of the state, and that is to amend then the Unruly Civil Rights Act. And with that, urge an aye vote.
Thank you. Witnesses in support?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jeanette Sanipatin. I'm the Legislative Staff Attorney for the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. I am here to support SB 111 by Senator Yee, which protects my right to speak the language of my choice at a business establishment. MALDEF is the nation's leading legal civil rights organization that promotes change through advocacy, communications, community education, and litigation. With our over 40-year history, MALDEF has made significant contributions securing the rights for Latinos in the areas of both here at the state and the federal level. SB 111 is a straightforward and simple measure that would make it a violation of the Unruly Civil Rights Act to adopt or enforce a policy that limits or prohibits the use of language in a business. It would prohibit the limitation of a language other than English unless it is justified as a business necessity. Once again, here business necessity is defined and consistent with the existing definition that exists in employment discrimination. And for all the reasons already stated, we are here in strong support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Member Stephanie Roberson on behalf of the California Nurses Association in strong support. In a similar vein, a big hospital chain here in the state of California had issued a letter on behalf of Filipina nurses stating that they shouldn't use their native tongue while offering services on the job. And as members the Filipina nurses that we represent in our facility, we believe that part of the component of offering competent care is being able to speak in the language that is reflective of the community and that patient. And so we appreciate the direction that this bill is going in. We think it's necessary in certain circumstances on the job, and we support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members, Mario Guerrero with Equality California, and we are in support of SB 111 and urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support? Any witnesses in opposition?
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. I'm Mira Gerten here on behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce in opposition to this legislation, SB 111. We believe that this bill will worsen an already dismal legal climate for California employers because it threatens them with lawsuits, makes them a target of lawsuits by their customers, but more worrisome by a select group of litigants who already exploit ADA law to force thousands of small settlements out of small businesses every year. And we believe that this presents the same threat to businesses. In addition, we're unclear on the necessity for the law. We realize that there are situations that have come up, for an example, with the LPGA Tour. However, those were solved without litigation. In addition, there's a number of ambiguities in the language of the bill, which makes this an unclear requirement for employers. The analysis suggests that this imposes no new burdens beyond what's in the FEHA statute. If that's the case, it's unclear why we need a new section of code and a new way for people to enforce what is already California law. However, it does seem to imply that and require more of businesses than is currently required under FEHA because it targets a new group of people. So instead of just going after the relationship between an employer and employees, it's also going to target a relationship between a business and its customers. And what they deem to be a restriction on language may be different, and so it will bring about new case law, new litigation for businesses. And so for these reasons, we would like the author to consider, and we have been reached out to by the author's office to discuss amendments, but it was late last week. We haven't had time due to the holiday to address them, so we would ask the committee to hold the bill over and give us time to try and address the concerns that he has to protect customers, but also to make sure that we protect businesses from frivolous litigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in opposition? Comments, questions from members of the committee? All right. Keeping in mind that we will be voting next week, Mr. You may close.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just very, very straightforward. I mean, the reason why this bill is important is that, as the opposition indicate, the Ladies Professional Golf Association did, in fact, change its policy, but that was only because of a tremendous pressure placed on. There were a lot of negotiations and discussions, and I will tell you also that many of the victims of that particular rule hesitated to come forth and challenge. So having this particular provision in law would prevent any of this problem ever occurring. So with that, as urgent, I vote when it's appropriate. Okay?
Thank you very much. Okay, now we can go to SCA 7, which is item number 10 on our agenda.
Thank you very much. And with that, let me first thank your staff for their assistance on this and prepared to take amendments described in page 6 of the analysis. The bill proposes that we amend the California Constitution to require that public bodies provide public notice of its meetings and publicly disclose any action taken. As I indicated earlier in my comments, given the situation with the budget, it may be unclear as to whether or not local or government entities need to follow the Brown Act. This would make it very clear that, in fact, that is a requirement within the state of California. With that, urge an aye vote.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Madam Chairman and members, Tom Newton, California Newspaper Publishers Association. We start with the proposition that the linchpin of the Brown Act should not be threatened every time there's a budget crisis. The idea that agendas ought to be posted that have a brief general description of items to be discussed at the meeting and that the bodies stick to that agenda at the meeting absent extraordinary circumstances is fundamental to let the public know that they need to be there to assert their many other rights under the law. This bill, we believe, will put before the voters a very simple proposition that meetings ought to be noticed and that actions taken ought to be reported out. And once the people agree to that proposition, then this legislature will be free to enact the Brown Act, reenact the Brown Act agenda posting provisions, and with the magic words that they're enacted to implement the Constitution. And thereafter, locals will be required to conform to the Brown Act without it being jeopardized every time there's a budget shortfall. We respectfully ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members, Terry Frank for Californians Aware. You cannot have a meeting of a deliberative body without an agenda. There have always been agendas. They weren't suddenly the result of some state mandate. And really all that's added by the typical Brown Act practice is a certain number of thumbtacks to put that agenda up on the wall someplace so people can see it. So the claims business has become quite a game, and it has grown to the point where it now dominates the annual anxiety about whether really there's any compulsion under the Brown Act to let people know what you're about to do at a meeting or not. We believe that it's time to end this game and all the suspense and put it where it belongs in the constitutional provision that says that government bodies' meetings are to be public. This is a logical consequence of that, but unfortunately it has to be express in order to escape this game, and we urge your aye vote on this bill.
Thank you. Next witnesses, please be very brief. State your name and affiliation.
Madam Chair and members, I'm Trudy Schaefer, representing the League of Women Voters of California. We were strong supporters of Proposition 59 back in 2004 that gave citizens of California this constitutional right to know what our government is doing and how and when. And this SCA 7 would give substance to that. No matter what the vagaries are of the budget situation and all the ins and outs of how that has been handled as a mandate or not, we strongly urge you to support this bill. Thank you.
Madam Chair, member.
Thank you. My name is Peter Scheer, and I am Executive Director of the First Amendment Coalition. And the First Amendment Coalition strongly supports SCA 7. We think that it is imperative that we maintain a notice requirement. The Brown Act simply can't function without an enforceable and clear requirement of notice. And secondly, I would point out that although objections have been raised, concerns have been raised about the costs of this notice requirement in the area of local government compliance, in reality, there are no costs. The only costs involved are simply writing a brief summary of what will transpire at a meeting, posting that on the internet, and or posting it on the door to the courthouse or to the agency. And the only time that costs are run up, quite frankly, is when some agencies unnecessarily consult attorneys whose principal function is to figure out how to say as little as possible to obfuscate what will actually transpire at a meeting. And if they were in fact less involved in the process of giving notice, the public in general would benefit greatly. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, members, just briefly, David Wolf here with the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. We too are in support of the bill. Just in terms of good government, open transparency, allowing local governments to post agendas in a proper manner. And let me just also say this is a fiscally prudent bill in terms of allowing local governments to pay for these things. I mean, this is a mandate by local government that should be represented and paid for by local government. So this bill does that. For those reasons, we'd ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, John McKibben on behalf of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials in very reluctant opposition to SCA 7. Our members are clerks of the Board of Supervisors, and one of our primary functions, of course, is to make information available to the public and provide them with the information they need to access the meetings of those legislative bodies. However, there's one thing that we don't want the legislature to lose sight of, and that is that clerks of the Board of Supervisors offices are generally quite small offices, and consequently are often underfunded. We do see the disappearance in this bill, the disappearance of what is becoming an increasingly important source of revenue to support our activities, not because it has historically constituted much in terms of a percentage of our budgets, but in declining economies with successive years of budget cuts, it has become increasingly important for us to keep doing what we do. There are some counties that have a single person in the clerk of the board office to support all of the Board of Supervisors' activities. It's especially critical for those offices to at least receive some reimbursement. The other thing to keep in mind is it's, to our way of thinking, it's not reasonable to remove this reimbursement. There are two constitutional provisions here. There's Prop 59, which typically clerks of the Board of Supervisors philosophically support. However, there's also Article 13b, Section 6, which says that if the legislature does impose a new mandate or an increased level of service, which is what we're really talking about here over the years in terms of Brown Act, that the legislature has to make a provision for subvention to reimburse local governments for that service or that level of service. This is being eliminated in this bill under the guise of transparency. Yes, we support transparency. Yes, we do want to make information available on gender-related information. However, what we're dealing with here, or what's being discussed here, is more of a compliance issue. And we're saying, please do not eliminate the income stream, or the revenue stream rather, but deal instead, if you must, with the compliance issue. I think in the Newspaper Publishers Association letter, it makes reference to bogus claims. If there are bogus claims, if there are entities that are overclaiming, and that's been proven to be true in state audits, let the state continue to audit or expand the audits and deal with that compliance issue. Don't eliminate the reimbursement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other witnesses in opposition? Comments, questions from members of the committee? Senator, Mr. Leno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point out to folks that this is an issue, given that it impacts the general fund, that was discussed both in Budget Committee and in Conference Committee. And because all of us support every aspect of the Brown Act, we believe that it should be a constitutional mandate, not a statutory mandate, which will make it non-reimbursable. The question is, why should the state's general fund be paying for county clerks to take a few moments to take some thumbtacks and put up a notice so that the public can know when the local agencies are meeting and what their agendas happen to be? So I just want to clarify, there's never any lack of interest in the Brown Act at the Budget Committee. But again, this reimbursement now totals about $20 million a year, if you can imagine. And of course, with a statutory mandate, the local agencies can charge the state whatever they want, and we can't challenge it. So it's gotten out of hand. And clearly, in support of the Brown Act, this is something that should be voted on by the people and decided whether or not it should be a constitutional mandate. So we've got Senator Hughes back, as we have it in a trailer bill, one way or the other. This is important to get to the voters, and not something in this state of fiscal crisis that our general fund can continue to consider reimbursable or affordable by the state. So I move the bill.
We were going to have a vote on this next week.
Oh, of course. But
thank you anyway.
Yeah.
And I do want to acknowledge, though, that I spent 11 years in local government. It's not a matter of thumbtacking a notice to the door to comply with the Brown Act. It is more than that, and I do want to acknowledge that. However, the point is well taken that it's not something that the state should be paying local governments to comply with. I mean, transparency is part and parcel of the democratic process, and without it, we simply do not have a functioning democracy. And witnesses for this bill have been closed. We've already taken all the tests.
Point, is that no?
No, sorry. I can't allow people to come back up after I've closed the testimony.
The same. My client was up here before. He looked lonely. So
Well, that's nice. But the witnesses, the testimony is closed. So you can submit something in writing or speak to Mr. Leno personally. Thank you. Anyway, I do want to acknowledge it is just a little bit more than that, but and this is a very, very important part of our functioning democracy, and I appreciate the legislation being brought forward. And with that, you may close, Senator Yee.
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Senators. I have to acknowledge that this is the first time that the Harvest Jan organization has in support of a bill of mine, and I should look at the bill more carefully now, maybe. But with that said, and I think this has been expressed by a number of the senators. You have to ask the question, what is the building block of our democracy? I think fair election, open government, accountability, those are the building blocks. And we ought to ensure that there is that set of rules and regulations that requires all levels of government to have that essential. Because if we don't have that, then we can do whatever we want, but nobody's ever going to hold us accountable. And that's what this is all about. And so with that, urge an aye vote.
Thank you, and we will take this up for vote next week. Senator Simitian, item number 8 on our agenda, SB number 445.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Forgive us while we play a bit of musical chairs here and rearrange ourselves. Madam Chair, Senate Bill 445 makes modest but important changes to current law to bring it up to date with 21st century technology. On a typical day, about 1 million Californians visit a library here in the state of California. This bill goes to the protection of their privacy rights when they make those visits to our California public libraries. I should tell you that the measure was proposed by one of my constituents who is seated to my left. Mary Minow is a resident of Cupertino and a library law consultant and entered as part of my annual There Ought to Be a Law contest. Her suggestion was a simple but, as I say, helpful one, and that is that we change the term registration and circulation to patron use records so that when you go to the library and your privacy rights are protected, that it will include online research and communication that a person may conduct. Kind of things we're talking about that are not clearly covered by existing law are emails to librarians for things like book transfers or book searches, online searches of sensitive topics, online records of the items a patron has checked out, personal information like name, address, and phone number, which are often attached to library cards, which are then sometimes swiped to use the internet terminals, library classes that people sign up for. Current state law only protects what a library patron reads and checks out in hard copy, does not include the searches or communications online that I've referenced. And on one point that I want to be very clear about for both my Democratic and Republican colleagues, it is not the intent of the bill, nor does the language of the bill in any way change the ability of law enforcement to do their job. Those provisions, in other words, the existing requirements under current law, remain the same and have not been amended by the language that we have put forth. We're simply talking about the content description so that we're all clear about what it is we're protecting. The existing process for law enforcement would remain the same. I would respectfully ask for an aye vote, and I have witnesses who've been here and would like to speak briefly if they could, please.
Delighted. Welcome.
Madam Chairwoman, readers are increasingly leaving more digital tracks, as Senator Simitian just described, to show what they're reading, inquiring, and consulting in libraries. I'm a library consultant. I'm very concerned with privacy and First Amendment. That's why I entered There Ought to Be a Law contest.
Could you state your name first?
My name's Mary Minow, M-I-N-O-W. Thank you. The American Library Association and the library profession have a strong ethic of privacy, and the Code of Ethics reads, We protect each library user's right to privacy and confidentiality with respect to information sought or received and resources consulted, borrowed, acquired, or transmitted. So it's much broader language than registration and circulation records. State laws were passed largely in response to the FBI Library Awareness Program, which was in the 1980s. Who had suspicious Eastern European accents were consulting scientific materials. And this was not for specific individuals, it was a Cold War fishing expedition. The California Public Records Law has an exception to protect library patron records, and it's worked well over the last 30 years with the exceptions that are needed for law enforcement. But it only covers the registration and circulation records. I'm not aware of uses thus far in California, but I am aware that in Florida there have been marketers and political campaign offices asking libraries for patron email addresses. And we have a lot more than patron email addresses. Jane will describe in greater detail the kinds of records that libraries are keeping because of this electronic world. Concretely, this bill would give the same protection to someone who's looking up articles online, say about an embarrassing disease, as it gives to someone who checks out that book from the shelf. And the top 3 subjects that our library users are searching on computers, according to a recent University of Washington study, are education, employment, and health. The law needs to be updated to protect patron confidentiality online or off. Please support the bill.
Madam Chair and members, if I may briefly, Mike Dillon representing the California Library Association. Senator Roberti carried the original legislation for us in 1980 when most things were paper. I'd like to introduce Jane Light, the San Jose Library Director. She's a member of our legislative committee and has been very involved with this bill as well. Just some brief comments from a library director's viewpoint.
Madam Chair and members, SB 445 will update the government code to reflect library records of patron use that just did not exist in 1986 when the current language was adopted. For example, in 1986, reference inquiries came to us either in person or over the telephone 99.99% of the time, and therefore there was no record kept of those transactions. Very rarely a library received a letter from someone out of town looking for local information such as an obituary, but that was so rare that we talked about it when we got such a letter. But today, my library and other libraries across the state receive information requests still by telephone and in person, but also by email, text, instant message, and online chat. And every one of these create electronic records. In addition, an emerging trend for libraries is moving our servers out of our buildings to a third party to maintain for us. It's a very efficient, cost-saving option, but it's very important that it be very clear that these third parties cannot release patron use records, and that only the library can under the exclusions included in this. We librarians want protection of patron privacy to be safeguarded now and in the future. SB 445 would ensure that, and we wouldn't have to be coming back to you, we hope, in 5 years for additional updating, and we urge your support.
Thank you. As much as we like seeing you here, it would be nice. Other witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition? Questions or comments from the committee members? All right. We were going to hold off on other votes until next week, but on this one I understand you have had an agreement. And okay, would you like to close, Senator Simidian?
I appreciate the motion, and I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Great. This is an excellent bill, and congratulations on winning the There Ought to Be a Law contest. There really ought to be a law on this subject, and I'm very happy to see this in front of the committee. Call the roll.
The motion is due pass to the Senate floor. Evans?
Aye.
Evans, aye. Harmon? Blakesley? Aye. Blakesley, aye. Corbett? Leno? Leno, aye.
And we will hold the roll open in case the absent member would like to add on.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you. Mr. Leno, I believe that leaves the bill, your bill, SB 129, and the bill you will be presenting on behalf of Senator Corbett, SB 182. So we will start with item number 3, SB number 129. Proceed whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the bill very simply creates a statutory right to employment for medical cannabis patients. Using medical cannabis per the auspices of the Compassionate Use Act of Proposition 215 back in 1996. As a result of a Supreme Court case known as Ross versus Raging Wire, there is a need for this bill. There was a fellow named Gary Ross, who was a military veteran who harmed his back in service to his country. When he got out of the military, he was incapacitated because of the pain in his back. He could not work, and he tried every prescribed narcotic and opiate. None of them helped him and left him very foggy-headed. He couldn't work. After the passage of Prop 215 in 1996, friends of his suggested, have you tried marijuana in a medical fashion? It might help your pain. So he went to his physician, got a recommending letter, and to his pleasure and surprise, his back pain was alleviated. His life was given back to him, and he was able to go back to work. When he applied for employment at Raging Wire, he let them know that he was a medical cannabis patient, and they hired him. They not only hired him, he was doing such a great job, they promoted him. And then there was a random drug test, and not surprisingly, he tested positive for it. On the spot, he was fired. Not for any cause, not because he was unable to do his job, not because he was impaired on the job, merely due to his status as a medical cannabis patient. So we then introduced this bill to respond to that Supreme Court decision. It should be noted at the time that the Supreme Court invited the legislature to clarify this ambiguity that was not addressed in Prop 215 with regard to employment rights. So this is a response to that invitation by the California Supreme Court to clarify. And I would just make the point, very simply, that it is beyond imagination that when voters supported Prop 215, they intended for the compassionate use of medical cannabis only for unemployed people. It makes no sense whatever. Keep in mind, we have 250,000 Californians who now have recommending letters from their physicians. It's a little less than 1% of the population. To declare that all of them have no employment rights is just foolish in this very down economy when we already have record high rates of unemployment. Why should someone be fired for just their status as a medical cannabis patient? So we have put some protections in the bill for employers and for the general public. For example, positions that are known in federal and state regulation as safety-sensitive positions will be exempted from this protection. So if one drives a school bus or a truck or heavy equipment or provides medical care, these are described as safety-sensitive positions, both in federal and state regulations. They would not have these protections. And additionally, this bill does not change current law, which already makes it illegal to use marijuana at the workplace during work hours or prohibit an employer from firing someone because they are impaired. It's just that you can't be fired for the status of being a medical cannabis patient. So I will let you hear from an individual who has had his own life experience with this situation. You will then hear from our opposition. I know their arguments, not only because they put them into a letter, but also because we've debated this once before when we did get the bill to Governor Schwarzenegger's desk. And I can tell you they are all false arguments. I would like a moment in my close to be able to respond to all of them and let you know why they are false. But I would ask your aye vote.
Thank you. Witnesses in support.
Thank you. Our sponsor and then our individual.
Okay. Hello, my name is Riddell Wilson, and I am the Community Liaison Director at Americans for Safe Access, and we sponsored SB 129. And today I'm joined by Peter O'Neill, who's going to testify as a patient who's faced this type of discrimination. SB 29 protects responsible, law-abiding medical cannabis patients from discrimination in the workplace. People obeying the law should not face employment discrimination. Voters and lawmakers did not intend for legal patients to be subject to discrimination when they adopted our medical cannabis laws. SB 129 treats legal medical cannabis patients like any other medical patient. They are allowed to possess and use their doctor-prescribed or recommended medicine away from work, but may not be impaired during work hours. It's sound public policy to keep medical cannabis patients who are able to work employed. Otherwise, they'll be an added burden to our social services in these tough economic times. The bill does not allow patients to use cannabis at work or to be impaired by its use during work hours. There's a broad exemption for safety-sensitive positions to shield employers from liability and protect public safety. Employers can still fire employees or deny them employment for cause. SB 129 does not make it harder to do so. It does not require employers to violate any drug-free workplace policies or to break any state or federal law. Other states have already have protected employment rights for legal patients, including Arizona, Rhode Island, and Maine. There's no evidence that this has caused more accidents, made it harder to fire an employee for cause, resulted in a wave of litigation, or caused even one employer to lose a federal contract. So I would respectfully ask for your aye vote today. Thank you.
Mr. O'Neill?
Hi, thank you. My name is Peter O'Neill, and I am here to ask you to pass SB 129 so that I and the 250,000 other California patients can work and be productive and pay taxes, despite the fact that our doctors have recommended cannabis for our various conditions. I would like you to pass this bill so that I can get a job without worrying about getting caught with cannabis metabolites in my urine. My doctor has recommended that I use cannabis to alleviate sciatic pain that results from degenerative disc disease. I also use it to great benefit for major depression. Long story short, I was an assistant manager at Walgreens, and someone in my personal life called my supervisor and made some allegations that I was using cannabis while at work. There was an investigation by the loss prevention supervisor, and the allegations proved to be false, that I was not, in fact, using at work. And we figured out that it was my roommate who was very upset with me at the time. And the loss prevention supervisor thought, hey, this isn't going to be a problem. If you've got a recommendation for it, it shouldn't be a problem. However, I need to run this by the district manager. Continue working your shifts until Thursday, and we'll have a meeting. And I did so. And I had been an exemplary manager. I was in the manager and training program, never had a negative review. All my reviews had been very positive. When I met with the district manager and the loss prevention supervisor that week, I was scolded like a little child for using medical cannabis. Prejudice of my district manager was obvious. He obviously had his personal opinion, and he was dumping it on me. And I was given the choice of voluntarily quitting or going to a year-long drug rehab as if I was a recreational abuser. Well, I wanted to keep my job, so I went to the rehab, and I went off my medication. And a short while after being off my medication, I was in a deep, dark depression, which got worse and stayed with me and lasted about 11 months. And it was very severe. And to be quite frank with you, I almost died as a result of the depression. I went back on my medication. I wrote a letter to my employer asking him to reinstate me to work, but of course he fired me. And then they denied my unemployment benefits. And it's been a real nightmare the last couple of years. Had this bill been in place a few years ago, right now I would be managing a store and working. But instead, I'm unemployed. I've drained all my savings, and I'm a hair's breadth away from asking family to take me in because I have not been able to find work. I would like to go get a job and work without the fear that someone might find out that I have a prescription. So again, I ask you to pass SB 129 so that I might work without fear of discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your testimony. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Lynette Davies, and I'm from Crestrados Patients' Rights, and I work directly with the patients here in California. I have two huge complaints that come across for me, and that's the right to work and, of course, housing. Those are the two biggest concerns that we've run across. I think the right to work for every patient is just essentially very, very important. BOE right now is actually receiving about $105 million a year in sales tax. Obviously, our people are working. A patient that works and is able to get better because he's medicated at night should be allowed to go on to work. We have people from every avenue. This bill is special because it actually is only asking you to go ahead and approve this the same as any other medication. It would be okay if they were on opiates. It'd be okay if they were on Vicodin, but for some reason, this medication, they're looked and frowned upon, and it shouldn't be. This is a real case of discrimination against a patient. A lot of their concerns were very, very valid. You know, they were worried about federal grant money as far as our opponents. That's a serious thing, but there's been no federal grant money. We have federal agencies that have stood up for patients all along. They've never had federal grant money taken away from them. We all agree on a drug-free workplace. We're not asking for you to allow them to medicate on the job or be medicated while they're on the job. You still have a drug-free workplace. They're asking for the right to medicate on their own time. So we're just looking at leveling the ground here a little bit and making it legal for a patient to medicate without fear of being discriminated against. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Other witnesses in support? Be very, very brief in your testimony. It looks like there's a number of you. I would prefer if you could just state your name and affiliation and the fact that you support the legislation.
Really quickly, I have a very interesting, this is very important. My name is Ryan Landers, and I'm the American Alliance for Medical Cannabis and the Compassionate Coalition. And a dear friend of mine, when we passed Proposition 215, which I helped with, and I was the spokesperson for here in Sacramento in 95, 96, was a state employee. She worked for the Franchise Tax Board. She told her supervisors that she was a medical marijuana patient. She abided by the basic terms of this 10 years before it was ever thought of, and did not possess at work, did not use at work, and they knew to check her work and make sure everything was fine. She worked for many years in the Franchise Tax Board in the business division, and she died a state employee. Luckily, she had insurance because they didn't take action against her, but she died of lung cancer after being able to go through chemotherapy and go and try to survive and try to continue to be a state employee. And this is just basic sense. We don't need new reasons to discriminate against people. It's so hard in this economy to get a job that we do not want to take the patients out, because you do put them a burden of the state. If they can't get insurance, where do they go? They go to the emergency rooms, or they get on SSI, Medi-Cal, Medicare, and they chew up the system. So it's only sensible to keep them working and keep them on insurance. And we really thank Senator Leno for pushing this forward, that we don't discriminate against the sick. You don't do this for Oxycontin, so don't do it for medical marijuana. Thank you.
Ignacio Hernandez on behalf of the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, Statewide Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys, in support of the bill.
Nate Bradley, Director of Lawmen Protecting Patients. We're a retired and former law enforcement who become patients. We support this bill.
Good afternoon. I'm Kimberly Cargile. I'm a medical cannabis patient, and I'm here to support this bill and my right to work.
Other witnesses can fill in the spots here. Somebody else can come up here.
Thank you. My name is Pamela Courtney Sheets, and I'm a cannabis patient and a citizen of the state of California. I ask for you to pass SB 129 so that I can remain a marketable employee in California and continue to be a part of California's economy. Thank you.
Dale Geringer with California Normal, one of the sponsors of Proposition 215. I just want to say there's no scientific evidence that drug testing is of any benefit for workplace safety or productivity. Exhaustive review of the study just published in Addiction. There's better ways of dealing with this, and that's performance testing. Thank you.
My name is Joy Cole. I am a longtime medical cannabis patient. I'm also a lung cancer survivor for 5 years now. And I strongly urge you on behalf of SAC patients, which we organize a group throughout Northern California representing patients. So we strongly urge you to go vote yes on this bill. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Minister Chris Vernay Gordon, and I live in Sacramento. I support the SB 129 for employees' rights and all civil rights for medical cannabis patients. I am a cannabis patient for chronic fatigue syndrome, and it's completely turned my life around. Thank you.
My name is Jolie Perea. I support SB 129 to protect medical cannabis patients, civil rights, and demand support for compassionate legislation in Sacramento, California. And I represent ASA and Cures Not Wars. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition of the bill? To the bill?
Good afternoon. My name is John Lovell, and I represent the California Police Chiefs Association and the California Narcotic Officers Association. And we're opposed to this bill. A couple of things. First of all, let's understand that Proposition 215 is so broadly written. It applies to any other illness for which marijuana provides relief. Senator, there isn't anyone in the state of California who cannot get a medical marijuana card. One example, we had an undercover officer in San Diego who found a doctor. And understand, these are doctors who advertise on the back of Sacramento News and Review. These aren't medical doctors who you really, these are folks who pass these out. We had an undercover officer who got a medical marijuana recommendation from a doctor for his menstrual cramps. Truly, truly a medical breakthrough. And that, I think, highlights how broad this is. The voters of California were faced with the issue of marijuana in the workplace in this last election, and even though the no side was outspent 10-1, the voters rejected marijuana in the workplace by almost 700,000 votes. Okay, let's talk about the discrimination provisions. Under the discrimination provisions, I test positive for marijuana. I'm the medical secretary for your psychiatric practice. And you say to me, John, I've got several patients coming in today who I'm counseling on suicide prevention, and I want them to be, taken in input in a real neutral way. You just tested positive for marijuana. I can't say if you're high or not, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to ask Mr. Blakesley to handle intake today. That's discrimination under this. You have reassigned me because of my medical marijuana, so-called medical marijuana positive test. Very serious issue about funding for federal funding. And I know one of the proponents told you, and I don't know where he got this information, that somehow the states that do this law, which incidentally we haven't seen the law in those states, haven't had problems with contracts. But here's the law. The Drug-Free Workplace Act of 1988 says that as a condition precedent to getting any federal grant over 100,000, the analysis is in error there, over 100,000 or more, or any contract of over 100,000 or more, you must be able to affirm that you have a drug-free workplace. If this bill passes, it will be impossible for many, many employers, including the state of California, including any city or county, to make this affirmation. And if Curtis Hill is still in the room, he's the former sheriff in San Benito County, he can tell you in some detail about how seriously that affirmation is taken when one is applying for a federal grant or contract. I can tell you that during the Prop 19 campaign, the Association of Defense Contractors here in California had their legal counsel look at the issue there, and the law there is virtually identical to what is in this. Look at the law there, and they concluded that it would have jeopardized their $4 billion in federal contracts and opposed the bill. The Chamber of Commerce, and you'll hear from them, also looked at this issue extensively and came to the same conclusion. The workplace safety issue is very serious. The medical marijuana law is so broad that anybody can get it. The discrimination provisions basically impact our ability to make assignments in the workplace, and it's going to cost federal grant and contract funding, including for law enforcement, because even though we're exempted under the law, The grant money goes to the city or goes to the county, which cannot make those affirmations. We would ask either that you reject this bill or you hold this bill in committee pending an opinion on the Drug-Free Workplace Act from the Attorney General, because we think that that fatally flaws the bill, frankly. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. Jennifer Barrera on behalf of California Chamber of Commerce, and we also oppose SB 129 because it limits an employer's ability to provide a safe workplace here in California. Under SB 129, one of our concerns is that you can't utilize a positive drug test to refuse to hire an applicant unless they're in a safety-sensitive position. However, the bill defines safety-sensitive position in such an ambiguous manner that it renders it basically useless for employers, given the fact that if they misclassify somebody in a safety-sensitive position, they fear the risk of a private right of action against them, and they will have to pay their defense costs as well as the plaintiff's attorney's fees under this statute. So an employer is not going to take that risk of misclassifying a person as safety sensitive. Then, on the other hand, you have them then put a person who is testing positive for marijuana in a position where they probably shouldn't be, and then they risk the potential liability for a negligent hiring claim because they put them in that position. It's an untenable position for employers in California. They are going to face litigation on one side or the other under this bill. The second concern of ours is that it isn't leveling the playing field for medical marijuana users, but rather providing them a significant higher protection than any other employee who uses perhaps prescription medication. Under this bill, it states that the employer cannot take corrective action until the employee is impaired, meaning they have to show objective signs that the employee is actually impaired because of their use of medical marijuana. Right now, the standard is that an employer can take corrective action if there's reasonable suspicion that they believe somebody may be impaired, not actual impairment, may be impaired. And this bill prohibits them from doing that until there's actual signs that they are impaired. So basically, they would have to wait until there's an industrial accident or some type of other injury to a member of the public or another employee before they could take any corrective action, or else fear, again, another lawsuit with the right to attorney's fees if they take action too soon. And then we also agree with the comments previously made about jeopardizing federal grants and contracts under this. There's no way that employers in California can comply with federal law requiring a Drug-Free Workplace Act and comply with this law at the same time. This law only prohibits the use of medical marijuana in the workplace. It does not prohibit the possession of marijuana in the workplace, and it doesn't prohibit somebody from utilizing marijuana minutes before they come onto the job and being under the influence of marijuana on the job either. And so for those reasons, we're in opposition. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Robinson with the California Attractions and Parks Association. We represent virtually all of the theme, amusement, and water parks in the state. We directly employ 125,000 people, produce $12 billion a year in the state economy. While we often support Senator Leno, in this case, we are strongly opposed to this bill, and the reason is quite easy, quite simple. It's simply safety. Modern theme parks, such as Disneyland, often will have 50,000 people at one time in their park. It's an extremely complex environment. We have extremely complex rides and attractions, electromagnetically induced induction roller coasters that go from 0 to 80 miles an hour and 100 feet in the air in a couple of seconds. These are very complex machines. We can't afford to have impairment of any sort, whether it is legally prescribed, whether it's medical marijuana, illegal or recreational. Any impairment of any sort is not acceptable to our industry. It is a matter of safety for workers, for children, for the teenagers, for the patrons in the park. Our ride inspectors inspect these rides every day, that put these rides together, that maintain these rides. There is no leeway for impairment on the job, or as it's termed in this bill, you have to wait for impairment be defined by a failure to perform your job. There's a zero failure option in these rides for our people. This will also open us up to litigation. Let's say, for example, if you do have an injury or you do have a mechanical problem on a ride and has been inspected by somebody who can be shown in a court of law to have been impaired or have marijuana in their system, it will greatly increase liability. Our first line of safety is a drug-free workplace, which is usually conducted and ensured by drug testing. We test for all the drugs, including medical marijuana. To say that it does not impair a person's performance, I would disagree with. It has been shown, and it's quite common, that marijuana does impair judgment, does impair reaction time, and in a workplace safety environment where you have public, you have children, you can't afford to have any impairment at all. So we strongly oppose. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional witnesses in opposition, please keep your comments very brief. Identify yourself by name and affiliation, and state your reason for opposing the bill.
Madam Chairman, my name is Roger Morgan. I'm representing the Coalition for Drug-Free California. We have about 250 organizations and communities up and down the state. I've been engaged in drug prevention work for about the last 15 years and know a little bit about marijuana, and I'm going to give you some comments also as an employer. If I was subjected to this law, I would close my company and move out of the state of California. And I'm just a little guy. The big guys, I think, would have humongous problems with litigation and trying to prove impairment. The reality is that marijuana is fat soluble. If you don't know what that means, it invades and attaches to every cell and organ in your body, and it stays there longer than any other drug. It takes 3 to 7 days for half the THC content to get out of the body. It takes up to a month for the balance. So if you're just a weekend user, it keeps stacking on top of itself, and it is known to cause impairment along with many health problems. We know now in the last 5 years that it's a causal factor in mental illness. It impairs young people's ability to learn. It impairs productivity. My own experience as an employer, I can tell you that it's kind of a bell curve. Some people are less affected than others. There's a whole lot of people in the middle that are simply impaired. If they're using marijuana at all, they're impaired. You don't have to prove it on the workplace. They don't have to smoke it on the job. And that's the biggest problem with this bill is you don't have to smoke this stuff or eat it on the job. It stays in your system for a month. So as far as the safety aspect is concerned, you don't have to be in a safety position, however you define that. The post office did a survey, and they said 55% more accidents from people that use drugs, 85% more injuries on the job. 80% of the injuries are not to the people that smoked it or used it. It's to other people. So from an employer standpoint, you've got a tremendous liability issue. Even driving to and from work, I've had a lot of discussions with our cannabis dispensary people, and there's no restrictions right now on somebody smoking pot and getting behind the wheel of a car and driving. Since SB 420 in 2004, the death rate from impaired driving with marijuana has doubled. Went from 630 for 5 years before to 1,240 now. So there's a lot of issues here. I'm definitely opposed to it, but I would tell you that the existing laws are so out of control on medical marijuana that before you implement any new laws, you ought to get the ones you have under control. There's a Sherman Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act implemented in January 2008. I urge you to look at it and enforce that law with regard to marijuana.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Committee. My name is Bishop Ron Allen. I am the President and CEO of the International Faith-Based Coalition. I represent 4,000 faith-based leaders in the Sacramento area, 7,200 national and international. It always amazes me when I have to sit in front of a committee and debate an illicit drug. It stuns me when we are trying so hard in the underserved communities to take away the advantage of using drugs. And then I come in front of a committee and I have to say, let's discourage the use of drugs, not encourage the use. We're having so many devastations in the underserved community. And now we're saying, let's give them the right to get high and go to work, and if they test positive, it's okay. That's amazing to me. We clearly understand that marijuana is the number one drug that our youth are using. I'll be very short here. The medical marijuana card is a joke in the underserved community. They laugh about that. Anybody, anyone can get a medical marijuana card for a bad hair day. I was walking down the street the other day, Madam Chair, not dressed in my clergy uniform, and a gentleman walked up to me and he said, "I got that green medicine." What? "I got that green medicine." I said, "What are you talking about?" "I got some weed." I said, "Well, do you have a medical marijuana card?" He says, "I'm legal." And that's the joke. The joke is, I'm legal. Well, why do you have a medical marijuana card? Because I can get it. And no one can stop me. So now what we're saying with SB 129 is that they can already get high with a so-called medical marijuana card with an illicit drug that is already illegal, federal and state level, and the spike in youth use has went through the roof. We got a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. But now we're saying, let's take the excuse, the very thing that we looked for and was hoping that would allow at least the black community to go to work and be discouraged in using dope before they go to work, or will keep the family together. Now we have a bill that's saying, let's let them get high on marijuana, this gateway drug, and if they're caught, they can't get fired. I want to propose to you, it is a Pandora's box that we're getting ready to open. And my last statement, the compassionate use, 215, let me tell you about compassion. Wow. When I have to look in the coffins of these young people, I look in the faces of these mothers and fathers because our children are dying over drugs. That's compassion. Compassion is not allowing people to get high. If in fact, I'm a bishop and a pastor, if in fact it was for the terminally ill and for those that were sick, come on, then let's back that. But what we're dealing with now is a joke. Maybe one day, ma'am, I'll just get legal too.
Thank you very much. I just want to caution the rest of the witnesses. I do need you to keep your statements as brief as possible. We have a number of people still to hear from. Go ahead.
Hi, Curtis Hill, representing the State Sheriff's Association, here on behalf to oppose the bill. One of the things that I'd like to state is, as a 10-year undersheriff and a 3-term sheriff here in California, I wrote many of the grants that were exceeding $100,000 that require the drug-free workplace. That was the single document that was, if that document was not signed by resolution of the Board of Supervisors in my county, my grant didn't move forward, period. That was the one document that the state and the feds required that we have that in place. We take that very seriously. Marijuana is a violation of federal law, and the state sheriffs is opposed. Thank you.
Dennis Loper for the California Hospital Association. We're opposed.
Jennifer Watt, on behalf of the California Peace Officers Association, would associate our comments with those of the sheriffs and the police chiefs.
Madam Chairman, I'm Brian Little, represent California Farm Bureau Federation on labor and employment issues, and I'd like to endorse the comments offered by my colleague from the California Chamber and request your opposition to SB 129.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in opposition? All right. It doesn't look like we have any other members of the committee right here to ask any questions, so Mr. Leno, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the generosity of time afforded the bill and the issue at hand. If I may just take a couple of moments to respond to much of the misinformation that has been put forward. And, you know, we've both been around this building for quite a while now. I've never seen opposition come so ill-prepared to make their comments, and I'll explain why. The Chamber made the point that someone could smoke their medicine just prior to arriving to work and then step on the employer's property and begin the work day. and that they would have no recourse, even though they could probably smell the marijuana, maybe even see redness in the eyes of the employee. They would have no recourse until that employee actually harmed someone or proved his or her impairment. That is just false on its face. Madam Chair, you or anybody else could go to the following website of bowles-langley.com/IND safety and immediately get to a website, which I did just this morning, and take an impairment test. And this impairment test tests cognition, reflexes, alertness, and memory on the spot for much less cost than a drug test, which you have to send away for results for a couple of weeks. Talk about greater risk to your clients or fellow workers while you're waiting for the 2 weeks to pass to get your tests back. This checks impairment on the spot. Also keep in mind the only thing that the blood or urine test will test is whether there are metabolites for marijuana in the system. Does not address impairment. Impairment is what's important here. So that's just a false argument. They don't have to wait until someone is harmed. They can just go to that website and within 5 minutes determine. And if you do use that test and determine that someone is impaired, you have the right to fire someone for cause. There was concern that the definition in the bill with regard to safety-sensitive positions is too broad and ambiguous. Well, it's not designed by our bill. We lifted it from the federal and state regulations. I'm now looking at the California Administrative Code, California Code of Regulations, Administrative Personnel, Chapter 3, Department of Personnel Administration, Subchapter General Services Rules, Article 29, Substance Abuse. That is where sensitive positions are defined. So if they've got a problem, they should contact federal regulators as well as state regulators. And you tell me if this is too ambiguous. The first one says their duties involve a greater than normal level of trust, responsibility for, or impact on the health and safety of others. I think that would take care of Mr. Lovell's example of your medical secretary. The second one says errors in judgment, inattentiveness, or diminished coordination, dexterity, or composure while performing their duties could clearly result in mistakes that would endanger the health and safety of others. That would certainly take care of the situation for the gentleman with regard to theme parks. So all of these are just red herrings. Sensitive safety positions are clearly defined in federal and state regulations. Our bill just uses those same words to define, for purposes of this bill, what safety-sensitive positions happen to be. Another false argument. They talk about, the Chamber does in their letter, given the threat of litigation that SB 129 creates. I would just ask them, as I did at our last committee hearing a couple years ago when they came up with a big zero for a response, prior to the 2008 California Supreme Court decision, Proposition 215 had been in effect for 12 years. I asked them 2 years ago, can you please name one case of litigation before that ruling of 2008, which gave employers the right to fire someone due to status? There were no cases. There are no cases. There are no cases in the 3 other states that have laws similar to our bill, and there are no cases in the other 12 states that allow for the medical use of marijuana but don't have the protections of this bill. It's all made up. They can't cite any examples of problems prior to the Supreme Court decision, or in states that don't have our Supreme Court decision, or in states that have the protections that we want to put into state law here. And with regard to Prop 19, it was raised that voters already defeated this. It's conjecture, of course, but if you were to ask your 10 best friends what Prop 19 was about, I suspect every one of them would say it was to legalize marijuana and tax it, not to give employees the right to be able to have employment. Again, another false argument. So impairment is really the issue, and I speak as an employer myself. I would use an impairment test because a drug test, whether you're testing for marijuana or for prescribed narcotics, if someone is impaired, that's when there's a problem. And at a time when we have sky-high unemployment, the idea that we would kick people to our unemployment lines, exacerbating our unemployment costs to the state, as well as the medical care that will be provided by the taxpayers if these people are no longer employed. Impairment tests are the way to go. Oh, and then one other surprising statement from a number of opposing voices. You heard quite a bit about the federal drug-free workplace law. It seems that no one who raised it bothered to look at what the federal government prohibits with regard to the federal drug-free workplace law, which impacts government contracts. The federal drug-free workplace law and regulation prohibit the use, distribution, and possession of illegal controlled substances in the workplace, but do not require drug testing. The U.S. Department of Transportation regulations do require drug testing of safety-sensitive positions, and as you well know, our bill already exempts those. So for all these many reasons, when we take up the bill next week, I would ask for your aye vote.
All right, thank you very much. As you noted, we will be taking this up for a vote next week when we have a quorum of the committee. Thank you to all the witnesses who testified on this item, as well as the author of the bill. We will move on to our last bill now, item number 5, SB 182, authored by Senator Corbett and presented on her behalf by Senator Leno. Mr. Leno, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you. Good job. Thank you very much. Thanks again for your help. And my best to Tony. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to present this on behalf of Senator Corbett and also as one of her co-authors. This bill would very simply include sexual orientation and gender identity and expression as additional demographic information collected by the Governor's Office, State Bar, and the Administrative Office of the courts. And the bill also ensures that during the transition between an outgoing governor and an incoming governor, the data for judicial appointments and applicants will still be released. So we already gather this information with regard to other demographics such as race, gender, ethnicity. All this data, including that which is proposed in this bill, is self-reported voluntarily by the applicant. So there is no concern for any risk of one's privacy being violated. And additionally, when this data is collected and reviewed, it's always in its aggregate, never individually. So for these reasons, I would ask for your support. And also, Senator Corbett asked that I make mention that she's pleased to accept the committee's recommended amendments on page 5 under comment 2 as author's amendments.
Witnesses in support.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Mario Guerrero, and I'm representing Equality California, the sponsor of SB 182. We know that the California judiciary suffers from substantial lack of diversity. Existing law does require the collection of demographic information, ethnicity, race, and gender. Without this data, it would be impossible to measure the diversity of the judiciary. The collection of this information is not used, and I want to make this very clear, is not used to fill quotas and is provided voluntarily. We also know that information about lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender judicial applicants and appointees are not collected. Without this data, we are unable to measure the representation of LGBT people on the judiciary. This important bill will collect demographic information about LGBT applicants and appointees so that we can further measure the diversity of our judiciary. Like the collection of ethnic, race, and gender data, this information will not be used to fill quotas and is provided voluntarily. I also, in closing, want to address very briefly the letter by the Capital Resources Family Impact Group that I cannot go without mentioning the tone of that letter, which suggests that the disclosure of someone being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender is shameful or something to hide. And I'm here today to clearly state that it's perfectly fine to be openly gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender. It's nothing that we should be ashamed of or hide, and it's appropriate that we try to collect this information to measure the diversity of the judiciary. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in support of the bill?
John Lovell, California Police Chiefs, in support.
Any other witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition to the bill?
Good evening, Chairwoman. My name is Paulo Civaja. I'm the Legislative Director for Capital Resource Institute, and I'm here to testify against SB 182. SB 182 seeks to pry into an individual's private sexual life by asking judges, judicial appointees, nominees, judicial candidates, and justices whether they are heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual. The government has no business collecting data pertaining to an individual's sexual preference. Supporters of SB 182 have stated in press releases and letters that SB 182 will result in more judicial applicants and appointees from the LGBT community. A judicial appointment is a serious matter. Judges are and ought to continue to be considered for judicial appointments when they have shown that they are A, capable of impartial rulings, B, have a long history that qualifies them to be appointed, and C, will fairly look and listen to all arguments before them. We all seek a diverse judiciary, and in fact, the State Supreme Court of California is one of the most diverse in the nation. 4 women, 3 men, consisting of 2 Asians, 1 Latino, a biracial, and 3 Caucasians. However, diversification in counties like Alpine, Amador, Calaveras, Colusa, Del Norte, Glen, Inyo, Lassen, Mariposa, and should I continue, only have 2 judges each. How can we diversify when only those counties receive 2 judges? It is kind of difficult to do so. And in addition to that, over 60% of California counties have less than 10 trial judges. The author seeks to, through the bill, to ensure LGBT representation in the courts. For example, in order for diversity to be considered adequate in the county of Mono, who only gets 1 judicial appointment, that individual would have to be an openly homosexual ethnic minority woman in order for people to be satisfied in terms of diversity. Such pressure will lead to unqualified judges. Judgeships are meritocratic by nature, and they should remain as such. We don't need to look at a person's gender, a person's race, a person's ethnicity. We should look at their work as a judge. As a good friend of mine said regarding SB 182, TMI. If you have children or teenagers, that means too much information. So thank you for your time, and I respectfully urge you to vote no on SB 182. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in opposition? Any questions or comments by the members of the committee? Senator Leno, you may close.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. I just heard the opposition say that this bill will pry into the personal lives of Californians. Again, if you read the bill, you would understand that all of this information is voluntarily offered and self-reported. So there is no prying into personal lives, but then that would take reading the bill to find out. And then with regard to for people to be satisfied, a judge would have to cover so many ethnic and orientation bases. Again, if you read the bill, you know this is not about quotas whatsoever. We already gather information for purposes of information so we can have a sense of how diverse our representation of the bench is, and we already gather that information for race and ethnicity and other demographics. This just adds one more. This is not about quotas. This is not about prying into personal lives. I would ask for your aye vote.
All right, thank you very much. And again, we will be voting on this bill next week when the committee has a quorum. So thank you very much. And that is the last bill that we had on our agenda. We have been holding 3 bills, the roll on 3 bills open. Clerk will call the roll for the absent member.
The consent calendar. Blakesley. Blakesley, aye. Corbett. 4-0.
Those bills are out on consent. And we had one more.
SB 445, which is due pass to the Senate floor. Harmon, Corbett.
All right. That concludes, that bill is out 3-0. Thank you very much. That concludes our business for the Judiciary Committee today. We are adjourned.